From girls of science to women of science. I was listening to Gitanjali Rao there and thinking, I want to be her when I grow up, haha, because she's 15 and she's already done everything before the growing up. But there are girls like her, and there were girls like her decades ago when it wasn't so easy to pursue your passion in science, when girls had to fight at every stage to be taken seriously, especially when it came to the super STEM subjects. But there are girls who broke through and became women of science. And that brings me to our next honored speaker today. She's the chief scientist of the World Health Organization, and she's holding that position at probably the most critical inflection point in the global health debate. The World Health Organization and her have been subjected to intense scrutiny, but before she occupied this post, she was a renowned tuberculosis scientist. You've heard her speak all year about COVID, but today we're here to learn about the woman behind the scientist, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. All right, Soumya Swaminathan is now with us. Can we please bring her on? Can we please bring her on? All right, there she is. Hi, Soumya. It's so nice. It's so nice to see you. And I was listening before you came on to Times Kid of the Year, Gitanjali Rao, and she was talking about stemming the bias. And I was just saying that there are kids who actually managed to become where you are. But today it's easier. It wasn't always easy. I'm sure in your time, it must have been much tougher. And I was just telling our audience that we've heard you speak about COVID all year, and we will have questions about COVID. But I do want to first ask you, especially after listening to Gitanjali, how difficult was it when you were a young girl and you knew you wanted to pursue medicine? What was it like? Who stopped you? Who encouraged you? Rewind us, take us back to those years.
Hello, Barkha, and thank you so much for having me on. And especially after Gitanjali, I was listening to, and I'm completely awestruck by this force of her personality. So more power to her and girls like her who are going to change the world, who are going to make a difference, especially for things like climate change, where science needs to play a very big role. When I was growing up, Barkha, I must say that maybe I was lucky, I was fortunate. I lived in a family and an environment and a school that did not really distinguish between boys and girls, didn't have any preset, models for us to follow, didn't tell us, what we were supposed to do. Basically let me follow and my sisters also follow their own interests and their own passion. So for me, it was more of a natural journey that took me to where I am. Of course, teachers and parents and role models do make a difference in the choices that you make in life. But I think the choices were mine, and I wouldn't say that I faced any barriers. In fact, it was the opposite. I was encouraged to pursue what I wanted to do in my childhood.
Maybe you had that encouragement from your family, but what about teachers? What about classmates? And I'm talking still about when you were a child, right? Because even today, the stereotyping, though the exam results tell us otherwise, is that boys are better at maths, at engineering, at the hard science subjects, and that girls are better at liberal arts. And I shamefacedly, I admitted this to Gitanjali, and I have to admit it to you, before biology exam at Modern School Delhi, would lock myself up in the sanatorium and say I'm having a stomachache, and you failed math. And I'm so relieved that there are women like you and Gitanjali who break that stereotype, because I am that stereotype. I am that girl who failed at science. So I'm just wondering, whether you had to battle meanness from teachers and kids, not from your family, but from others.
Well, I was always more interested in biology than I was in the pure sciences and physics or mathematics. So I always was paying more attention to the life sciences. And again, perhaps that's because of my family and my childhood growing up in a research institute, visiting, the labs, the genetic lab where my father worked, visiting the fields where the experiments were being done with genetically modified plants. And I got a deep interest in research, actually. There were always students in our house discussing their PhD or master's thesis. So I think I was focused on research from a very, very young age, and it was to do with the life sciences. I actually wanted to be a pure scientist and do genetics and perhaps apply it more to veterinary medicine. And I found myself in medical school completely by chance. It was only because all my friends in pre-med were writing the medical entrance exam that I even wrote it. I had no intentions of doing medicine. And I wrote only one entrance exam for the Armed Forces Medical College, thinking I'm not going to get in. That will solve the dilemma. I'm going to continue with my pure science track, do a PhD. But as fate had it, I got into the AFMC. And then once I'd gotten, I decided to join because it was quite attractive as a college, as well as the subject, of course. And then I got interested in pediatrics because, again, maybe because my love for animals and children from a young age, drew me to pediatrics. That's how and then the research was always there at the back of all this. I knew that whatever I did, I wanted to focus on research.
Yeah. You mentioned your father, and we were saying that we're here to know the person, the woman behind the scientist. I don't know how many people hear Dr. Soumya Swaminathan and immediately know that you're the daughter of the famed MS Swaminathan, who is being invoked even today. There we can see some pictures on the screen with Soumya with her father, the architect of India's agricultural program, the Green Revolution, and being invoked today as farmers protest now for weeks altogether. They all want the Swaminathan panel to be implemented. He's a great man. What was it like to be his daughter, Soumya?
Yes, I mean, I think looking back again, there were probably much more positives than negatives of growing up in a household where my father was already a well-recognized international scientist. And so we had the opportunity to meet scientists from all over the world who would visit the Indian Agricultural Research Institute. And we got to hear, and we were young then, but there were Nobel laureates. There were people like Sir C.V. Raman who came and stayed at home, and we got to hear from really wise people. At the same time, my father always made it a point to take us on his field visits. So I've gone to many villages in Punjab and Haryana where he was working with the farmers, and in fact, very often on the weekend we would drive out and we would sit and talk with farmers. And that's where I think I learned that you need to talk to people. You need to talk to the people you're trying to actually serve, or the end users of your products, the new seeds that he was trying to create and so on. And at the same time, my mother worked with, migrant labor. She worked with an organization called Mobile Creches, which set up creches for young children. So I've been to many of the construction sites with her and seen how babies were not taken care of until these creches were built and for these women. So my parents both made sure that we had exposure, even though we lived a privileged life, relatively, with everything we could ask for, on a government salary, of course, but we never felt, the lack of anything. We were always very conscious that there were many, many people in India who were not so fortunate. And I think that also had a deep impression on me growing up.
Yeah. So I was listening to you speak, and I thought, the farmers today and your father, your mother, and migrant workers has been the story, the humanitarian story of the lockdown that followed the COVID pandemic. So really, your parents, in some ways, were ahead of their time. Is there a way you still felt shackled by your parents that you resented? Like, was there ever a time? Children always want more freedom than their parents give, right? Were there moments when you argued with them, when you fought with them, when you said, "Let me do this, you're not letting me do this"?
Well, my mother was very strict, and so she, but then there were always boundaries that were laid out, and it was, of course, all children, especially when you get into teenage years, you rebel against the rules. But they were not unreasonable at all. I would say we were given a lot of freedom. We could choose our friends. We were allowed to go out. We went on, treks and things like that many kids would not have been allowed to. The one thing, of course, was that when you grow up with a famous parent, then there is that shadow you growing up under, and the expectations, whether anyone says it or not, there are these huge expectations, of you as a child. And especially also as you're growing up through your teenage years, and you're always conscious of the fact that people, you want to be recognized for yourself. The last thing that you want is to be, for people to say, she's where she is because of her father or because of her parents. So that I was always very conscious of and made an effort. My name, of course, gave it away, but if possible, I would have always hidden the fact, that I was his daughter in those kind of situations where you wanted to be shining in on your own terms.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, how you come into your own, you grow up, you become, one of India's foremost tuberculosis experts, TB scientists. As a grown woman dealing with prejudice all around you, and it's in every profession, what were some of the most sexist things that you, as a woman scientist, actually had to confront?
Yeah, well, and I think, this is global, it's worldwide, it's not just India. In fact, in India, maybe we're even a bit better off. We had role models of women, both in science and in politics and so on, well before some of the Western countries did. We had role models in medicine for sure, right from, the early 1920s. So in a way, in medicine, actually, you don't have that gender imbalance to the extent that you have, say, in physics or astronomy or pure mathematics. And so you feel it less. But at the same time, as you become more and more senior and advance, and then you find yourself in meeting rooms and committees, particularly in, whether it's a scientific academy meeting or whether it's a government meeting, you are outnumbered. Men do outnumber women. There are many organizations where the heads are all men. So at that time, you feel that you're being ignored, and I think women are less likely to be aggressive and speak up. At least that's me. I would wait for my turn to speak, and very often that turn never came because there were always men who wanted to have their say and were much more forceful and aggressive. And at times, I would feel that I was being ignored. And I must say, it was my mentors at that time when I was in my early 30s and working at the Tuberculosis Research Center who kept telling me that it was important for me, because I was a technical expert, to go to these meetings and to be heard. And sooner or later, people would start listening, depending on what you had to offer and to say. But it is difficult. And very often there's also a north-south divide. And even though I grew up in the north, Barkha, so I'm very fluent in Hindi. But many of my South Indian colleagues used to say they felt so uncomfortable. They would go to Delhi for a meeting, and the meeting would then basically happen in Hindi. And anyone who was not Hindi speaking would feel really excluded. So there are many ways in which you can feel excluded, not just because you're a woman. And over time, of course, you learn that you need to assert yourself, you need to and I still remember one incident when I became the DG of ICMR. I landed at 1 p.m. in Delhi. I went to meet the health secretary. He said, 2 o'clock is your meeting. Now that you're here, you're chairing it. I walked into the room and I find all my ex-teachers and mentors and senior colleagues sitting around, and I'm expected to chair this meeting. And then they were all men, and all of them start talking, and I'm not able to even, how could you say, to somebody who's 20 years senior to you? So that's again an Indian ethos where we're really taught to respect our seniors. So I think all of those things really make it harder for women to assert themselves. But this is something I think the younger generation, I think it's changing. It's definitely changing.
So I know we have a couple of minutes left with you, and I do want to get to COVID, but just one question. Like I'm listening to you talk about entering rooms where you're ignored, where the men are doing all the talking, where if you do not have an aggressive, some would say North Indian personality, you don't actually assert yourself, or maybe it's a woman thing also. Not all women are like that, but many are. Was that mansplaining before the term came to be known as mansplaining? Did you have an early exposure to mansplaining?
Yes, definitely. Definitely it is. And sometimes even now, I think, a lot of the senior men in positions where they can make a difference, like Dr. Vijay Raghavan, for example, is extremely sensitive to this and ensures that there are women on every panel. And there are men now, of course, who say they won't be on panels and all that. But unfortunately, there are still far too many men who are not sensitive to this. It's not that they're doing it on purpose, but for them, it's not odd that there's no woman around the table, that it's a 10-man committee. So I think this needs to change. I think everyone needs to become more sensitive.
What has been the toughest thing for you in your career? Obviously, this year I think has to count as that, and I'm leaving my COVID questions for the very end. But if you look back at your life and look ahead at it, what has been the toughest moment as a woman when you've said, or if you've said, "Oh my God, I can't do this"?
Well, I think the most emotionally draining period for me was when I started taking care of HIV patients. And this was in the 90s before there was antiretroviral treatment. And our center was one of the few who was taking care of HIV infected patients because of the link with tuberculosis. And I took care of a lot of orphans as well, children who had been abandoned or who had lost one or both parents and who themselves were infected, and the families wanted nothing to do with them. And I remember after about 2 or 3 years of this, of course, we were doing our research on TB, but it involved a lot of, medical care for these patients. There were very few people willing really to work with them because there was such a fear and a stigma. And I remember thinking, I can't do this anymore. I'm losing patient after patient because after all the care that we gave them, we knew that they were going to die and they would die. They knew they were going to die as well. So there was a point where I was reaching a burnout. It was affecting, my own life, my mental balance at home. I had young children, and people would say, "How can you go and work with HIV infected, people and touch them and everything? And then you come home and you have your two young children at home, and are you not responsible?" and things like that. So this was very, very tough, but we got through that period. I still remember the patients; they're still in touch with me. Many of those children are now, young adults, the ones who've survived, of course. So it was a very, very challenging but very fulfilling experience. And then we got antiretroviral treatment in 2004, and things dramatically changed. And then, you could offer a life basically to people. And that also lifted the weight off my shoulders. So I think personally for me, that may have been the most challenging period of my time. Balancing, of course, work and family is always a challenge for women.
Yeah, I always say that we talk so much about equality at work, but till we talk about equality at home, women will continue to struggle with this, with finding this balance. And without equality at home, there can be no equality at work. I want to come in the end to COVID. You said that, dealing with HIV patients was probably the most emotionally exhausting, challenging phase of your life. Was it tougher than this year has been when you've been quite literally at the front line of the COVID war? You have been under relentless scrutiny. The WHO has been under relentless scrutiny. The science has changed literally every month. Even small things like knowing whether to wear a mask or not, who should wear a mask, even all that has changed. Our understanding of fomites, everything has changed if you look at this year, right? What has this year been like for you, Soumya, being right there at the front line of the COVID battle?
This year has been unprecedented. I don't even have words to describe it. It's been such a roller coaster of experiences. Starting on January 5th, the day we came back from the Christmas break and learnt of this, and then from that day on, it was non-stop. And then in February and March, it got worse. Because Europe started exploding with cases. Switzerland, where I'm based, was also exploding with cases. We heard of deaths every day. It was so painful, and at the same time, this huge weight of responsibility. The WHO needs to put out the right guidance. We need to follow the right, the science. And we needed to make sure that we do the right things at the right time so lives could be saved. But on the other hand, there was also, for me, the very positive experience of working with scientists around the world. Right from day one, we knew the solutions had to come from science. And so we started convening our expert groups and scientists and doctors early in January. And this has resulted, today, what an unprecedented scientific breakthrough and achievement to have not one, but several vaccines for a virus that was not known, at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
That, I think, is definitely. So the word for me this year is science. I mean, there are a lot of other words that describe this year, a lot of anxiety and pain and always humbling. Every time you thought you knew something, there was something new that you learned. And so it humbled you, you need to always be open as a scientist. But again, I think it's the support I got from my family. Of course, I live alone in Geneva, but you mentioned, support at home. I think without a supportive partner, a husband, it's impossible to do some of the things that, women scientists in India and around the world have been able to do. And they're often not recognized. So I think must give a shout out to all the supportive parents as well as children, who sacrifice a lot so that their parents can do their work, which is their passion.
Absolutely. Just briefly, where are we? This was not going to be a COVID conversation, but my audience won't forgive me if I don't ask you that. Where are we? The world is getting ready for a massive vaccine rollout, different vaccines in different countries. Is the worst? Are we looking at a phase where the worst is over? And what about the scrutiny? There's a question on the screen saying, Soumya, you're wonderful, but there's a sense that the World Health Organization did not act as it should have, that it let the side down. That's not about you, but there is a disenchantment with the WHO, if you want to respond to that question.
Sure. So first, where are we? I think we're at a turning point, but we're not out of it yet. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, but we're still in a long, dark tunnel. And it's going to take some time to come out of it. And I think people need to remember that. They shouldn't think on the 1st of January, just because a few people got the vaccine, that the pandemic is over. In fact, the next 6 months may be the worst that we've seen. So we need to continue to really be very vigilant and to have the public health measures as we roll out the vaccines. And for me, the biggest challenge today, looking ahead, is are we going to be able to get those vaccines out to people around the world at the same time in an equitable manner? And that's what the WHO has been really working on, the COVAX facility with Gavi and with CEPI and with many, many organizations. Our goal is for equitable vaccine distribution, but it is challenging because there are limited supplies and there's already been a lot of pre-booking of vaccine doses. But India is in a good position because of our domestic manufacturing capacity. And the amazing innovations that have happened in India this year is also something that we should discuss at a separate time. Coming to the question of WHO and whether we made mistakes in the beginning, I think looking back, we need to look through all of those actions that were taken in the early days. And there is, in fact, as you know, the panel that's been set up by the DG to actually go into every step and every action, not just by the World Health Organization, but by countries around the world, because this needed to be a global response. WHO can only put out recommendations and guidelines. It's up to countries to actually implement them. We mustn't forget that. And also we have limited powers in what we can do and what we cannot do within countries' jurisdictions. So I'm sure that in 2021, all of this is going to be discussed. It's going to be discussed at the World Health Assembly. There will be reforms that are suggested. Reforms should be made. I think we should learn from this pandemic, never be in this situation again. In the future, we need to strengthen all our institutions, the WHO, but also other institutions in countries that are responsible, for response. So no doubt, all of us have a lot to learn, and I'm sure there'll be things that we will be told we could have done better. And we need to be humble and accept that and learn from that, not repeat our mistakes again.
Right. I'm actually really chastened to hear you say that the next 6 months could in fact be much worse than anything we've seen now. And I do want to just take this moment to then step back and appreciate everything you've done, everything you've been through. This is a pandemic where science has constantly shifted. It's easy to finger point. It's not so easy to actually live it. And Soumya, with that, we do want to honor you, felicitate you from We the Women with our first COVID Courage Award of 2020. Let's just play that out and then I'll talk to Soumya for just one last comment. So thank you. This is a virtual world, so we have to send you I'm going to ship you your actual award to Geneva where you are. But this was just the formal announcement. Just very quickly, why is the next 6 months possibly going to be much worse?
Because the virus is spreading at an unprecedented speed. It's really accelerating. And I'm talking, of course, globally. If you look at many countries around the world, and when infections accelerate, deaths follow. We're still in the winter in Europe and many parts of the Northern Hemisphere. That is going to make things much more difficult. And there's a fatigue and a complacency that's setting into people who think, it's over now, they've got the vaccine, things must have got sorted out, let's just go back to normal. And so for all of, plus there's the fallout of all the economic damage that happened last year, as well as the impact on other diseases. All of that is going to start catching up with us this year. So I think we really need to keep our heads down, focus on keeping the infection as low as possible. And then when enough of the population is vaccinated, and that's going to take a year, year and a half at least to happen, we may have enough population immunity for the virus to really go down to very, very low levels. So we have another year to go at least, I think, and so we need to keep up that solidarity and support for each other.
Sobering words there. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the Chief Scientist of the World Health Organization, the winner of the first We the Women COVID Courage Award of 2020. Thank you. We've taken more of your time than we intended to, but there was so much to talk about. Your extraordinary life. May you continue shining at the front line of science. Thank you and be well, Soumya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barkha.